the mic?
Hello, thank you. I don't think my microphone's working. Fortunately, I'm really loud. I don't know if you guys can all hear me, right? I don't think the microphone's working at all. I tap it, it makes noise, but it doesn't seem to catch my voice. Okay, well, thank you. I figured it was going to be a little bit of light room today, which is fine. I guess the other people thought lunch is more important than listening to some guy talk about remote teamwork, but hopefully this will be useful for you folks that did invest your time to come here. So I want to start out a little bit about myself, just give you a little bit of history on who I am and why you should be listening to me talk about remote teamwork. So I tried to find a picture of myself from the last time that I actually worked somewhere at a company. I actually was creating a profile, and so I've always been a computer programmer. Sitting at your desk to create a picture is not very exciting picture. So I found this is from over 7 years ago, which was the last time I worked actually at a company. You can see how young and fresh I was. The reason I chose that is because, just to mention, that I've been working remote for over 7 years, full-time remote, not going to the office. I've had success and failures throughout those 7 years based on a lot of different things, and so that's what I'm going to share with you guys today, is some of the tricks and techniques I've learned throughout those 7 years to figure out how to work effectively remote. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a lot warmer than Minnesota, although I actually work here out of Minnesota. I'm a work-from-home remote employee out of the Nerdery here in Bloomington. I'm not sure, are we hiring? We are hiring, so if anybody's looking for work. I am also an O'Reilly author. I wrote a book about Android developer tools. And I am also starting to research my next book endeavor, which is all about remote teamwork. So basically, for the past 2 years, I've been thinking a lot about this subject, starting to document my research. This is my first presentation about the subject, which is a really nice opportunity for me to kind of take this information I've been gathering on the road, start to get a feel for what's important out of the subject matter, what's not, and kind of get also some other experiences from you guys on the sort of struggles and successes you have. So as I mentioned, I'm working on this book. It's called Remote Teamwork, kind of like the title. Right now, I have a Twitter available. I'm starting to promote some information through that Twitter, so feel free to follow me on Twitter. And hopefully, in the next year, we'll have more announcements about actually the book, but don't want to get into too much of that. Oops. Okay, so I want to start out with the definition of what work from home or what remote work means. Basically, it's just a person who works outside of a traditional co-located workspace. So I want to spend just a few minutes on this because it's more than just people like me, where I am actually a full-time employee and I don't have an office I go to every day. I want to just kind of bring to everybody's attention that there's a lot more kind of categories of work from home employees. There are people that work from home just a day a week. There are people that work with contractors, right? We definitely have lots of different companies where we might bring in a contractor, especially a contractor from overseas, perhaps, to do just one piece of work. Basically, is there anybody in this room that doesn't work remotely or work with someone that's remote? Yeah, I mean, it's really prevalent in today's work. In fact, more than 60% of the organizations surveyed by the Society of Human Resource Management, 60% of the organizations in 2017 said they support some sort of remote work, and that's up quite a bit from just 10 years ago when it was 20%. We can talk about why some of those trends are happening, but basically remote work is becoming more and more prevalent in the world, and I want to kind of talk about some of the techniques and stuff to make it more effective. Okay, so I wanted to start off with a few quick slides to kind of discuss some of the different perceptions that people might have about remote work, and then we'll spend the rest of this hour kind of dispelling some of those notions and discussing how we can overcome some of those challenges. Okay, so the first slide is called Becky on the Beach, and I wanted to kind of put this slide on there to talk about where a negative employer perception might happen, right? The employer thinks that, oh, Becky's never working. Becky is just, wasting all her time, hanging out on the beach, doing whatever it is that remote people do. We can't see them. I assume that she's just messing around and not doing work. So I think that's a common negative employer perception. I want to add one other personal note to this slide, is Becky is failing. If she is working remote and she's spending her time on the beach working, she's doing it wrong. So that's a very negative perception that I also want to dispel throughout this talk. This slide is kind of what it generally feels like to be the employee in a remote environment where you're not supported. It feels like you're in the middle of the frozen tundra all by yourself. You have nobody to talk to, nobody to answer your questions, and nobody looking over you. It can be very isolating and very challenging. And then lastly, this is kind of more what remote work really is like. I love this particular slide because it's so amorphous. You can't tell if the lady's mad or excited or happy. Basically, this is more like reality, right? This lady is probably trying to cook her dinner. She's obviously working in her kitchen, not in a very good location. And she's probably trying to finish up that one last email, right? Or get that one last compile done so that she can push her PR up. This is more realistically like what it's about. You're kind of always working and always available. And I kind of want to talk about that as well. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is organizational resistance to remote work. There's a lot of discussions about how you can overcome these things. I just wanted to highlight some of the most common resistance that organizations have and talk real quick about how dispel those myths real quick. First one is technical limitations. We just can't support remote people. It's too difficult to get all the things done that we need to do. In today's society, technology is really not a challenge for anybody. We have great telecommunications tools, excellent networking. Technical limitations are not as challenging as they used to be. I just also wanted to mention I'm kind of making this talk towards technology workers, either coders, designers, business development. This talk is really for software engineers, if I didn't mention that before. Operational challenges, those go into the same sort of things. We just can't support remote people. It's too hard. It's too much extra effort. That's not necessarily the case. Organizations worry that their remote employees won't be professional, won't show up on time, won't get their work completed, that sort of thing, and that's just frankly wrong. Remote workers can oftentimes be more productive, and certainly the requirements that any worker gets their work done is the same whether you're working in an office or not. Wouldn't work in our industry, so this is an interesting one to talk about because while there are certain industries where it may be challenging to have a remote worker perform your task, perhaps brain surgery, for example, you may not want a remote surgeon to be doing that, although even that can probably be done nowadays with some sort of telepresence. But I actually worked for a company that was creating a app for cardiologists to read EKGs remotely. So while maybe brain surgery, the industry is not ready for remote work, most industries do have opportunities and places within that industry. So to say it won't work in your industry, I think is kind of not true. People worry about employee engagement. If the employees are all just away, how are we ever going to get to talk to them? Are they ever going to be around when we need them? You know, worried about Becky hanging out on the beach, not being at her desk when we need her. And that shouldn't happen. And then the last one is that our company culture doesn't support it. And I think that that is actually a valid current argument. And there are lots of companies' cultures that don't support it. But that's not an excuse for making remote work happen. I'm going to explain some of the different techniques you can use to bring your organization along and make them change the culture so that it does support remote work. Okay, so I kind of got over some of the reasons why people might not think remote works. Now I want to dig into a couple reasons why remote does work. And so this is some practical reasons, should be pretty straightforward. So work-life balance. Every software company I've ever worked at is really promotes that they support work-life balance. No organization is going to tell you they want you to come in and work 60 hours a week. We own you. Every organization is trying to strive towards work-life balance, and remote work really allows that, right? We cut down on commute time. We allow people to be home if they need to be there for meetings. People can work in their own environments, which they can be more comfortable. There's lots of benefits to being able to work remote, if not full-time, part-time, and that does allow a lot of flexibility. Another important characteristic, and this is probably, I think, exactly why I am actually working for the Nerdery, is you have a much larger talent pool when you're recruiting from international. I know it's very difficult to find people in Minnesota that are good developers, don't have a job, and are looking for work. It can be very difficult, and you don't always have a huge talent pool, but when you open that talent pool up to everyone in the world, you suddenly have a lot more options available to you to get really high quality people that fit your exact niche specifically. So enough said about that. Something that's purely practical is the lower cost to the company. So if they start to have more employees that don't come to the office, they can shut down part of the office, right? That saves rent. So that's the cost of facilities. If your company is located in a large metropolis where cost of living is high, you can actually hire remote and actually pay lower salaries, right? You don't have to pay a San Francisco salary to someone that's living in Idaho. And in fact, the Idaho person, so you can pay less than you would pay your San Francisco guy, but way more than that person would be making if they lived in Idaho. So it's a win-win for everybody. The company saves on salary. The remote worker is actually getting a little bit more salary based on working for a company that's located in some place that generally pays higher salaries. So we already talked about the cost of living, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is super important, is employee happiness, which leads to retention. I guess I can just share this. This is a result of the Stack Overflow developer survey, and what it says is that, I'll just read it to you, 53% of the programmers ranked remote as one of their top 5 favorite benefits of working at a company, over healthcare, over working hours, and over professional development. The reason that's so important is that employees really value the flexibility that comes with working remote, and that sort of flexibility really leads to better retention and better employee happiness. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the intangible benefits of working remotely. And yes, I did have work-life balance on the practical benefits and also the intangible benefits. So the interesting thing about work-life balance is there's tons of intangible benefits when you don't have to be in the office every day. It allows you the flexibility to pick up your kid from school early if you need to. It allows you the flexibility to sneak off during the day to run a quick errand. There's lots of impractical benefits to not having to be at a specific location during the day. Another intangible benefit is, let's say you want to, your wife is going on to a conference. You want to join her. You can go to that conference with her, work during the day, and you're still fulfilling your requirements, but you have this flexibility that is really beneficial. Another intangible benefit is the ability to time shift. So people are different. Some people like to wake up early in the morning and are super, that's me, that's Jeff, I think. Wake up early in the morning, start coding for a couple hours before anybody's around, and have all our PRs done before the day even gets started for most people. And likewise, there's lots of people that the thought of getting up, our stand-up starts at 10:30. And there's a reason for that. A lot of people don't want to be at the office before 10:30, right? I've already got half my day done. People are different, and the ability to time shift and work when you're at your best is a super intangible benefit that remote work gives us. Something intangible is environmental impact. If you're not driving, you're not putting fluorocarbons into the air, you're not burning gas, you're not doing all the things that hurt our environment. The ability to get into a flow state. So I'm a programmer, and a lot of times for my programming task, I really want to get into a flow state. That means I'm really like focused and in the zone, and ability to really execute. That's called flow state. That can be difficult to do in a shared environment. There's lots of distractions. There's lots of people coming to your desk, or phones ringing and stuff. The ability to get into the flow state and stay in that flow state in isolation is a huge benefit to being isolated out of an office. And then the last thing, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about a second ago about traveling with my wife to a conference, is the ability to achieve opportunities for creative stimulation. So I'm a software engineer. That is a creative job, and it requires the ability to change mindset when I'm facing a problem, to attack that problem in a different creative way. And the ability to work remote allows me to create opportunities for myself to have creative stimulation. As simply as just changing environment, right? I'm stuck on a problem. I can't figure out this problem. I've been working on it for an hour. Frequently what I do is I leave, so in Phoenix, the Nerdery has an office where I work sometimes. Frequently, if I'm stuck on a problem, I will switch locations. I'll switch from home to the office. That gives me a different creative mindset. Also, frequently, when I stop thinking about my problem for a few minutes, it's solved. So more than not, the 15 minutes it takes me to drive home is when I solve the problem, not when I'm sitting at the computer struggling, banging my head. Okay, so if your organization does not support remote work from home, you can't just start working from home. It doesn't work. You're not going to be able to accomplish what you want. What I suggest people do is they create a plan, an actionable plan that will allow them to create a work from home program, and then work with their manager to iterate and make sure that it's working for everyone. So there are specific steps I outline. Of course, this is kind of just a project plan or a process plan. I really encourage everybody to follow a process. You can't just start working remote without any sort of idea and any sort of measurement if it's successful, because you can't measure that success, right? So if there is a problem, you don't have anything to back up whether it was successful or not. So anyway, I'll just go through this really quick. First important thing to do is create policies and expectations, right? So we want to lay down the law. This is the hours that we expect somebody to work. This is how many hours we expect you to work. Whatever that is, your productivity requirements. Whatever those criteria are, get them down in writing, set those expectations. Then everybody is working towards those common expectations, and there's no question on what's working or what's not. So once you have created those expectations, find a trial project. So if you went to Dan Liu's architecture presentation, he said find a real small project that's not mission critical, that's not going to create problems if it doesn't succeed. I suggest that for this case too. Find a small pilot project that doesn't have huge impact on the organization, and try this and see how it works. So that's step number 3. Do a limited time trial. We're going to try for 6 weeks on this project to see if we can work 50% from home, and we're going to see how that affects our productivity, if it increases the PR throughput or reduces it. So the next step of trying to figure out if the system you're putting in place works is measure it, right? You have some sort of criteria, measure the criteria, figure out if it is working or not. Then the last part of this is repeat, right? In software, we do iterative development where we do small feature sets, we iterate, we do another feature set, we iterate. Same thing with this. Create a process, try it out, figure out what's working, and repeat. Then the last part of it, about the last step, is to create a formal proposal. So make sure that you document the things that you want to get out of the program, prove that you, through your limited time trial, it is effective and it does have these benefits, and then create the formal proposal. That way, everything, all the expectations are on the table, and everything is clear. So this is a lot of paperwork, and for developers, this was really kind of not that easy to create these sort of processes and stuff. I wanted to highlight teleworkva.com, which is the Virginia government's website for telework. There are many websites like this, actually. But what I wanted to highlight is they have these really great documents already created to help you through how you measure and how you set up these processes. So I really like this one. It just gives you a bunch of different checklists you can go through, and you can say, did your work improve or get reduced in this case? And you just go through and measure the output from your project. State of Oregon has a really good website as well. So check out these resources. There's tons of documents and tons of ways to help you create a project plan. Because if you don't, you won't have any way to prove how successful remote teamwork is for you. OK, so that's kind of getting the process started and why we want to work remote. I'm now going to kind of transition a little bit into tips and techniques that I've learned through my years and research that make remote teamwork more effective. And this slide is more focused on how we can make it work as an employee for the organization. So the first thing is establish office hours. I don't know how many of you folks have worked with people in India. That's extremely challenging. The Indian time zone is exactly 12 hours opposite of us, which means generally there's never a time when those two teams are interacting with each other. There's never a time when those two people are together. It's great if you can create establish some office hours that mandates that those people are together and overlapping during these times. Time zones can be very challenging. But the reason that we establish office hours is setting these expectations, right? We expect you to be at your desk, working and available at these times. And as a fellow employee, I can expect you to be there, and you're there. That's great. So more policies and expectations. We may want to talk about throughput or different responsibilities you may have that are more difficult to run when you're outside the company. Maybe you run a local lunch and learn in your company, and since you're remote now, that's harder to do. So you set some expectations and set some policies to kind of figure out how you're going to get your work done when you're remote. Getting the policies and expectations set is extremely important so that everybody knows what we're doing and everybody is working towards the same goals. Remote is awesome. It's really awesome when you know the people you're working with. And the only way to get to know the people that you're working with is to actually be with them at some times in real life. So companies need to create opportunities for summits or all the employees to come together once a year, just so that people are together and people realize that you are a real person, not just a disconnected set of electrons that comes across a video screen. Seems kind of obvious, but the company needs to hire for the aptitude for remote work, right? If you are going to be creating a remote program, make sure that the people you're hiring are self-starters, able to stay on task by themselves, motivated. A lot of the things that are required out of a remote worker, you don't have the same sort of oversight, obviously, as you do if they're in-house. So you need to make sure that you basically hire the right people for the job. It's important to support effective communication, and we'll get into this a little later. But on a high level, this means creating a good chat system that people are able to use effectively, creating good video conferencing equipment. So your conference rooms have good speakers, good cameras, and that your employees have access to some sort of teleconferencing system where the important thing is multiple people can join. So a teleconferencing system like WebEx or Hangouts or Zoom, any of them that allow group communication. One-on-one is not enough, and it has to be video. The last thing, and I really like this, I got this out of another remote talk I was listening to this week, is assume good intentions. So as a company, assume that your employee knows what they're doing, is good at their job, and wants to do their job well. I think that's extremely important to assume the best of people. People do work hard, and people are good at their work. Give them the credit ahead of time and the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so that's kind of some of the things you can do as an organization to become effective, to make remote teamwork effective. Now I want to talk as a remote worker what you can do. And this is to be effective as a remote worker. This isn't necessarily, well, this is just to be effective as a remote worker. Some of this is to be effective for yourself so you don't get burned out, and then some of this is to be a good worker so that your employees like you, your organization values you. So they have both roles here. So the first one is more a role to protect yourself, and that's set boundaries. So set office hours. You're going to work from 8 in the morning till 6 at night. You're going to go to the office. After 6, you close your laptop and work is over. I mean, of course, that can't always be the case. You have emergencies or whatever. But set those boundaries, set those expectations, and communicate that to your boss. Hey, yeah, it's after 5. I generally try to cut off after 5, just so you know. Set those expectations and live by those boundaries. The boundaries are extremely important when working remote. If you don't set those boundaries, you'll work always, 24/7. You'll work when you're in bed. You'll work when you're eating your breakfast. You'll work when you're mowing the lawn. And that's all consuming, and that's not good for anybody. So, I have a little typo there. Frequent and clear reporting. So as a remote person, nobody can walk by your desk and see you working. Nobody knows when you're struggling or when you're having an issue that's taking much longer than it would expect to get this code done. Make sure you're communicating frequently and often. Make sure that your status is regularly communicated to the people that need to see it. This is different now. You are invisible. If you don't make yourself known and don't communicate what you're working on, then nobody knows about it. So make sure you do that often. Stay on task. It's really hard when you're remote to stay on task, basically. There's so many distractions. You may have laundry, groceries, a dog that's looking for attention, whatever. It's important that you develop the skill set to stay focused. There's lots of different ways you can do this, Pomodoro technique, or using a variety of different kind of skills. But the most important thing is you need to make sure that you focus on work and stay focused on that work. Solve issues pragmatically. This means that as a remote person, you're not always able to just get the attention of somebody else. You need to make sure that you're able to isolate a problem, troubleshoot that effectively, and solve it as best you can by yourself. Now, the important thing to note is if you are stuck and you can't get your problem solved, don't sit in isolation for days fighting, hitting your head. Make sure that you reach out. This is part of that reporting thing. Reach out and say, hey, man, I have been working on this for 6 hours. Can you please look at this with me? I don't know what I'm doing. Don't do it for 2 days. Don't let that 6 hours become 12 hours or 24 hours. Make sure that you're self-started and working as best you can, but don't let your isolation make it so that you're not getting help or not getting yourself out of bad situations. Be present and available. So that means during those office hours we established, 8 to 6, that means when someone pings you on Slack that you're there for them. Assuming you're not in a meeting or whatever, but be present and available. When someone asks, hey, you have a minute to look at this with me, be there for them. And it may actually mean that it's not a good time for you, but when people are coming to look for you, especially as a remote person, you need to make sure that you're available. If it's not a good time, you can say, hey, sorry, man, I'm just in the middle of something. Let me get back to you in a half hour. That's fine, but when someone is looking for you and you're supposed to be there, be there. Simple enough. So I had assume good intentions on the organizational slide. It's also on this slide as well. So when the organization isn't doing stuff that you like, assume good intentions. We're all in this together. We're all trying to accomplish successful work, whatever that is. Everybody has good intentions. Assume that your manager is good at their job, cares about you, and wants you to succeed. When you start with those assumptions, life is better, right? You don't go into these spirals of negativity, and you don't create situations in your head that may not exist about how this person's not helping you or whatever. Okay, so that is that. Now, next thing I wanted to do is kind of talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques that I've used that I found effective. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is your workspace, your cubicle. This is super duper important that you follow these things right. This is one of those ways that you can set boundaries and keep your environment, your work environment, your home environment, your not. I think the goal is, when you're working remote, is that your home doesn't become your work. You don't want your life to become work, because that's not good for anybody. Okay, so the first bullet is your cubicle, your work area is for work only. It's not a shared environment. You don't, when you're working remote, you don't work from your kitchen table. You create a desk somewhere where you go to work every day. So that means when you get up in the day, you go to your office and you go to work. Doesn't mean that you roll over in bed and start working. Make sure it's comfortable. You're going to be spending all your time there during the day. So don't create some cramped space that it's difficult to spread your work out. Doesn't have the things you need. Make sure that it's a comfortable workspace where you can comfortably sit for hours at a day and get your work done. Make sure it's secluded. So if you're at home where your family is and or your neighbors or whatever, don't sit in the middle of the hallway where there's going to be constant distractions, people coming up to you always. Make sure that you find yourself a place in your home that is secluded, that can be your workspace. This can be a closet, it can be the corner of a room, and we'll get into the specifics a little bit more specifically. So I talked about it earlier, make sure it's work only. So this is not someplace you live. We're not going to set up a home office in the middle of our kitchen because it's always there. That means when you're cooking dinner, you have a hot date coming over, and you're cooking dinner in your workspace, and you're thinking about work. So make sure to keep these things separate. And the last thing I really wanted to mention that is sometimes overlooked is info security. So make sure that if you're working in an environment where you have sensitive data or sensitive materials, make sure that you are in a secluded place where you can isolate those and make sure that they are secure when they need to be. Okay, so I wanted to give a few quick examples of some different offices and show you maybe how some are better than others. So this is actually my home office. I'm super lucky. I mentioned I live in Phoenix, Arizona, where the cost of living is not very high. I have a really nice big house, and I actually have my own office. So I have my own office where it's my man cave, my own room. I have a super nice sit-stand desk, right? That's important. We'll get to that a little later. I also have a really nice chair, right? That is a Herman Miller Aeron chair. I will tell you that I bought that off Craigslist 20 years ago for $400. The reason I mention that is because don't be afraid to buy good equipment. Like, this is your workspace, this is your office. Many employers will pay for that equipment if you need to upgrade. A lot of employers would buy you a desk or certainly provide you different things. But if not, well, if you're an independent, the US government is more than happy to help you get some tax benefits from capital expenditures relating to business. But even if you don't have any of those two things, treat yourself right. Make sure that you get equipment that's going to keep you comfortable and productive. It doesn't cost that much, and it makes all the difference in the world. Also, if you can get a dog, it's really nice to stave away the loneliness. Okay, so not everybody lives in Arizona and can have a giant bedroom to make into their office. This is a great office too, right? It's just a little corner of the room, secluded off, but it's isolated and it's specific, right? We can't necessarily, this is New York City, I believe, so unfortunately they don't have the same sort of real estate like we do, like I do in Phoenix, or actually probably you guys do here in Minnesota. It's still isolated, it's still comfortable, and it's still not part of the general living space. So never, ever work in bed. You just don't. I don't know if I could use this quote, joke. Beds are for two things. Work isn't one of those things. It's a bad habit to get into, and it really blurs the boundaries. So seriously, do not work in bed. It's just not. It's not pragmatic, and it's not something that is useful going forward. Okay, so I already talked a little bit about this, or quite a bit about this, but we'll just recap it a little bit. Invest in proper equipment. This is your workspace. You're spending hours and hours of a day there. Don't splurge. Treat yourself right. It's worth it. So some of those things that are really, really useful to get, sit-stand desk. I love my sit-stand desk, and it's important. It's sit-stand desk. So I spend half the day sitting, half the day standing, and that can be 15 minutes at a time, sitting and standing. That is a great way for me to get those creativity juices flowing. When I'm sitting down and I'm getting struggled, or I can't quite get past this, or I'm getting tired, I stand up, and it's like reinvigorating. Likewise, when I'm standing up and getting tired and not really thinking right, I sit down. It's just a great way to kind of just give yourself a little bit of a change of environment. And it's also healthy for you, right? Sitting is the new smoking, they say. So treat yourself right. Make sure you have a monitor or multiple monitors. If you are, I'm not really talking about nomads here, those are people that don't really work from home but kind of work from everywhere. If you're a nomad and a monitor will help you, travel with a monitor. There's all sorts of different portable monitors you can use. But make sure that if that's something that you can use, most people need like a good monitor at home. So just make sure that you invest in that. It's not that much. Bandwidth is super important, obviously. Make sure you have adequate bandwidth that you can participate in video conversations. It's really important that when you're communicating to the outside world, that you're able to do that effectively. Here's one that you may not think about is professional attire. So you're working at home and you could wear sweats. Don't do that. When you're getting ready for work, I should say when I get ready for work, I get dressed. I put on work clothes, I shower, shave, and I go to my office, just as if I was going to drive to work. But you don't roll out of bed and just start working your sweats. It's not going to look good on video. People are going to see that. And also, it's not good for your mindset, right? Be professional. Work hard and treat yourself like you're going to work. And the last thing is audio-video equipment. So I'll just go to the next slide. So this is the audio-video equipment I use. It's actually not very good at all. Let's start over again for a second. The microphone on your laptop is terrible. Don't use that. There's a few reasons it's terrible. It's very far from your mouth, for starters, so there's lots of background noise. Also, there's lots of echoes that come through. Depending on the computer you're using, frequently you'll hear echoes coming back of your own voice from the other person. When you're using headphones, you don't hear those echoes. Extremely important. So I use this Plantronics headset. I think it's about $30 I bought. It is great. I went to Wirecutter and researched which ones they think are best, but $30. So I'm not talking about a super expensive headset. Your earbuds from your iPhone, fine. They're great. You don't need anything super powerful. We don't need Sennheiser headsets with a noise-canceling boom, but you do need a headset that, and you cannot use your microphone on your computer. Likewise for the video camera. So I actually, on my regular computer, I have this EFF sticker covering my camera, which you guys should all do, but this is not a security presentation. I leave that sticker on all the time. But I have this nice USB camera that I use that I can plug in that I use whenever I want to be on video chat. The video camera on your laptop, that's perfectly adequate. You don't need to buy another one of those. But again, just that USB video camera was $20. So I'm looking at $50 of AV equipment here, and it's all very awesome, and it's all perfectly adequate for my needs. You don't need something super great, but you absolutely do need a headset and a video camera. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about video and being effective on video. So when you're remote, you're invisible. Nobody knows you. Nobody can see you. The only option for you to be seen, quite literally, is on camera, on video. So my most important tip, and I think this would be my most important tip for the entire talk, is video cameras on. With video cameras on, you become a real person instead of a mindless avatar. People start to know you. People recognize your face. The other important thing about video cameras and communication, visual communication, is lots of people use their hands, use facial expressions. You cannot see those when the video camera is not on, and that's a lot of the communication that will get lost if the camera is not on. Appearance matters. So when you have the video camera on, this is what I was talking about before. Professional attire, look good, comb your hair. People can see you, and in fact, I'll bring this up in a second again. In fact, I'm out of order. Okay, so this is about cameras on. So this is a real true story. This is my friend Craig Russell. He lives in Ireland. And I want to tell you what's so great about having cameras on. And I don't even probably have to tell you, because you can see the joy from the picture. So this is actually a recreation. The true event happened about 10 months ago. But we had to recreate it. So it's the same baby, but she's actually now 10 months older than she was. Okay, what happened was, me and Craig are talking about a problem. We're on video, and his wife says, "Here, take the baby." We're in the middle of work, and whatever the wife needed, whatever. It was super delightful, right? Baby comes into picture. He holds her up. We're throwing her around and waving to her. Super happy. So the great thing is, I got to meet his baby. He got to show me his baby, which is like super important to him, and we created a bond, right? We now have like something outside of work, something that's not related to us, our work, and we've now actually become friends, right? We actually now have a personal bond, which we wouldn't have had if that camera was off. So let's talk about if the camera was off. I'm texting him. We're in the middle of a really intense conversation. He just goes away, right? He gets the baby. He's done. He can't type back. He may type be right back or whatever, but I'm just sitting there waiting like, oh, man, Craig went away. We're just in the middle of this. What's he doing, that jerk? So video cameras on, super important. This is the way that as a remote person, you start to build a bond and you start to build a relationship with your other remote people. You cannot do that if your cameras are off. And this is cameras off during the stand-up, during shared meetings, every time. If you're in there, your camera should be on. The other interesting thing about your camera being on is it forces you to pay attention, because you know that if your camera's on, you better not be staring at Facebook or off on some other channel. Be present. Okay, appearance matters. So let's talk about what this is the vision that everybody in my stand-up sees of me. And actually, it's on almost this big of a screen, right? Everybody sits in a conference room. They're sitting around a room. We have a big video screen at the back of the room. They see a big old thing of my face. So make sure that what you're presenting and what you're showing them is good, right? So close your closet door behind you. Try to clean up some of the fluff that's behind you. Pay attention to what you're doing with yourself. Don't pick your ears or do things that might not be good. Be conscious that you're on video and make sure that you're presenting a professional appearance. Okay, and I wanted to use another example from work about thinking about people that are not in the room. So at work, we have these really awesome Jabra telecommunication systems where they're really, really nice speakerphones that sit in the middle of a conference room. Problem is they are super sensitive. So whenever anybody touches a wrapper or is speaking somewhere, it is super loud in that conference room, and you can hear it in that speaker. The other thing I'll mention is two problems with this video. So this is our stand-up. So the first big problem in this room is that it's not an enclosed room. So I mentioned that we have these really sensitive speakers. There's somebody has their desk right on the other side of that wall, And every morning during our stand-up, I could hear that woman just as loud as I could hear anybody else in our conference room. So be conscious of, and nobody in the meeting can hear that lady, of course, right? The speaker phone is picking up that lady and amplifying her, but nobody in the conference room knew that was going on. The other thing is, Mike Richards has a big head, and it's in the way of all the other people I want to see in this conference room, right? Think about where you're. I hope that you tell him I said that in front of everybody. I specifically made sure I called his name out to honor him in my talk. He has a big head. All the people on that side of the table were getting bonuses that day. I wanted to see the joy in their face, and I couldn't. Not really, but the point is, think about the environment that you're in, especially when there are people on the other side of the wall. So I did mention this to Mike Richards, aforementioned big head Mike Richards. Solve the problem, right? We are now in a conference room, enclosed conference room, and the video camera is so much better, right? That's Mike at the end, right? Now everybody can see everybody, and there's no back talk, no noise. So that's just a success story, but the thing I want to mention is make sure that when you're present, you're thinking about the people that aren't present. All right, does this end at 50? More or less. Coming into the end, so we're doing good. So I wanted to talk about some of the challenges of being remote, in particular, mental challenges, right? It can be very lonely, isolating, challenging, etc. Be present on the team. So when you're in a video conference, when you're in an activity, be present, be there. Don't multitask. Don't participate in multiple things. Be present. When you're in a phone call, when you're in a conversation with someone, make sure that you're there and you're paying attention. Truth of the matter is, as a remote employee, you don't have as many activities as someone that is on site. Generally, I have 1 or 2 meetings a day, but I just want to make sure that when I have those meetings, that I'm there, that I'm not doing something else. It can be very lonely when you're working from home, especially if you don't get yourself out. You sit at your home, you work 8 hours a day, and even if you are creating boundaries, then you spend the next of your 4 hours in your own home. You may not actually leave your house for days at a time. If you're single, you may not even see anybody for days at a time. It can be very lonely and very isolating, so I'll talk a little bit about how we manage that a little better. Focus is really hard. In general, we talked about this before, that as a developer, I want to find my flow state and get into that flow state. Finding that focus is very challenging. So you need to really make an effort to make sure that you don't get distracted, and that's a skill you develop. Also, breaking focus is hard. Once you do find that flow, it's hard when you have to get back out of that flow. So it's important to make sure that you manage that and that you develop systems and ways to do that, and I'll help you with that. The other thing that is obviously something to be concerned about and think about is substance abuse problems. So it can be very easy to smoke marijuana all day, or start drinking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It happens. It's really not a joke, but you need to be conscious of that and make sure that you're on top of that, and that you need to identify if you are having those sort of problems and find help. Obviously, most of the places that we work have resources to help you with that. It's a real problem, and it can really happen, so just make sure that you're on top of it. Okay, so here's some of the methods I use to kind of help create a healthy attitude and a healthy mind. I establish regular meetings. So I have one-on-one meetings with a bunch of people throughout the week. Me and Jeff meet every day. Me and Kenton meet at least once a week. These are just one-on-one meetings with no agenda, right? Hey, I want to make sure that we're communicating regularly. We don't have to have an agenda. This has 2 really big benefits. The first thing is you just get to know that person, right? Hey, how you doing? We always have something to talk about, but it doesn't have to be stressful. It doesn't have to be something specific we're talking about. There's always going to be something. The second part of this is that when there is something difficult to talk about, this isn't the first time you talk to that person, right? Like, it's just another meeting. It's just another opportunity for you to talk. So it's not like, oh, Jeff just set up a meeting with me. This is not good. I'm in trouble. It's like, oh, cool. My regular meeting with Jeff? Oh, yeah, I guess we have something important to talk about. No problem. Frequent feedback. So this is providing feedback about the things that you're doing and also getting feedback from your management. How am I doing? What can I do for you? How can I help you differently than I am? We've all read at the Nerdery, we read a book called Radical Candor, which is basically all about the concept of making sure that as a manager that you're communicating your needs and establishing criteria for success and failure. Do that, right? It's not that hard. Basically, it all boils down to communicate often. We already talked about office hours. We already talked about making sure that you're dressing for success. Participate in group chat. Make sure that you're there. Make sure that you're prevalent. And the nice things are also participate in the random channel of group chat. It doesn't have to be just the Java channel where you're answering questions about coding. Go into the movies channel or the food channel. Create a personality and use your personality. And then the last thing is make sure that you socialize in real life. When you do have opportunities to be with that person in real life, socialize with them. Don't go back to your hotel at the end of the day when the happy hour is happening. Force yourself to go out and meet your coworkers, because when you have a relationship with your coworkers that has some personality basis to it, it's a better relationship and you're going to be more successful. Okay, this will be my last slide. I wanted to mention one other thing about how you can maintain a healthy mind that's not work-related, and that is finding activities outside of the office. So I mentioned it's super easy to be a shut-in when you're a remote worker. You may not leave your house for days at a time. You need to create opportunities for you to get out of your house. So a great opportunity is your local Google developer group. We're here now, so you guys already know about that. Kudos. Find yourself a community and get yourself involved so that you can start to create relationships and start to create opportunities for yourself outside of work. As a remote worker, your social world suddenly gets much smaller, so you need to figure out ways to create a broader social network so that you're not a shut-in and that you don't feel isolated. Another way you can do that is go working at a co-working spot. So obviously you guys know what that is. The Nerdery in Phoenix is actually located in a co-working spot, which is great. This is a great opportunity for you to go and meet actually other technical people or other people that may be working in your industry, but you may not have a professional relationship with them, and that's fine. The other thing is you can go to a coffee shop. Obviously, it's a great way to get out. Doesn't cost very much and allows you to just get out of your house. And then the last thing I would mention is get a hobby. And a hobby is not, oh, I'm going to learn Kotlin instead of Java. Hobby is stamp collecting or race car driving or something that's not related to software. Make sure that you create opportunities for yourself to get out. Okay, so I'm out of time. I just had one more slide, which we'll skip real quick. We'll just go through it real quick, and then I can say I did them all. Also, great way to create a healthy attitude is get a pet, right? A dog is super nice to come home to. Change of scenery, we talked about that quite a bit. Maintain those office hours. Office hours is good for you to be there during those hours. It's also important that when you're out of the office, you're really out of the office. So when 6 o'clock comes, shut your laptop. It's over. That really will help you maintain a healthy attitude. And exactly in the same vein, force yourself some downtime. So at 6 o'clock comes, you may not have your PR ready. It's okay, it'll be there tomorrow. I am going to go work on my stamp collection. Okay, that's it. There's obviously no time for questions, but I did want to thank you guys for your time.